Hello and welcome to APTN National News for this Tuesday. I'm Daryl Stranger. In Alberta, Indigenous policing is now being recognized under the Provincial Police Act. It will give First Nations police services more freedom when it comes to decision-making. Members of the Blood Tribe Police say it's a step in the right direction, but it's not just recognition that is needed. Tamara Pimentel has this story.
Here on the Blood Tribe, the community's police service has its own dispatch and communication center, a cell block, and 37 police officers. They've been operating for 30 years, but Inspector of Admin Support Farika Prince says it hasn't been easy.
For the past 30 years, we've been receiving the same training as our policing partners. We follow the same standards, we're subject to the same rules, the same hiring practices, and yet we're significantly underfunded compared to our policing partners.
There are 3 Indigenous police services in Alberta, and in October, the Alberta government announced it will recognize those forces in the Provincial Police Act. This gives Indigenous policing more power to make decisions, hire and appoint their own officers, issue tickets, and enforce community bylaws without approval by the province. It's something Indigenous police forces have been seeking for years. But Prince says one thing is still missing.
I mean, it's great to get this recognition. It's great that we're going to be able to govern ourselves. But what we're missing here is the funding that goes along with it.
Even with this announcement, Indigenous policing in Alberta is still seen as a program. It gets program funding by the province and federal government. Last year's budget was at roughly $6 million for the Blood Tribe Police, but that funding isn't always guaranteed. It needs to be renewed every 1 to 5 years.
We need to be moved from a program to essential service.
Police Chief Kyle Meltingtallow says essential service funding would bring a sense of security to the community.
They want to feel safe. They want their crime to be solved to the best of its ability. And they want their situations addressed in a timely manner.
Blaise Bomer, press secretary for the Minister of Justice, says funding might be possible in the future through grants.
There are other police grants that the province delivers, and we're certainly open to keeping conversations open with First Nations police services to see if and when those grants could be applicable.
With over 1,400 square kilometers to cover, to its community, the Blood Tribe Police Service is essential, and Prince says gaining that recognition is a step in the right direction, but hopes that in the future, changes happen to Indigenous police funding.
Indigenous people deserve quality public safety, and when they're underfunding Indigenous police services, they're basically saying that public safety in an Indigenous community with their own police service isn't as important.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News on the Blood Reserve.
Justice advocates in the Yukon are calling on the territorial government to build a women's halfway house. Without one, women looking to transition back into society must leave the Yukon or stay in jail to serve their full sentences. Sarah Connors met with some women who say a halfway house is long overdue.
Mackenzie Joe is from Champagne and Ajax First Nation. She spent 6 years at the Whitehorse Correctional Center. When she was released in 2014, she says she received no support from the jail to help her transition to the outside and had no halfway house to turn to.
I just got out of jail and was basically thrown right back into society. I didn't have any therapy, no slow transition.
With no way to cope with life outside of jail, Joe turned back to her addictions and voluntarily sent herself back to jail in order to get clean.
It was really hard because you don't have anybody to help teach you how to sleep in a house that's not locked. You don't have anyone to help teach you, just to help you with these things to get back. Just going to an appointment, to have to walk to that appointment for me, to be out in public was so hard. The stress, the anxiety.
Now, Joe is calling on the Yukon Department of Justice to build a halfway house for women in the territory, so Indigenous women like her have a fighting chance to properly transition back into their communities.
If they had something there, it would have been easier for me to connect with my kids. I ended up turning back to my addictions, because I was scared. I didn't know how to deal with stuff.
This building in Whitehorse was once both a men and women's halfway house, but due to issues housing both sexes in the same facility, services for women were discontinued here around 15 years ago. Now, men can stay in a supervised residential facility in a former unit of the Whitehorse Correctional Center, while women are left with nowhere to go.
And it's not just the Yukon. Despite Northern Indigenous women having some of the highest incarceration rates in the country, none of the territories have a proper women's halfway house in place. As a result, women in need of one have been forced to travel down south, or in some cases, remain at correctional facilities until they finish their parole.
Jenny Cunningham is a defense lawyer in Whitehorse and has many Indigenous clients. She also wants to see a halfway house built and says not having one often results in women reoffending.
And then they don't have that transitional release into the community where they want to live, where their children are, where their family is. There just isn't set up here for that. So it's ended up displacing women, and it's also ended up incarcerating women.
She says that not providing women with a proper halfway house is a human rights violation.
There's less women, there's less programs, there's less funding, there's less halfway houses, and it's just based on systemic racism in the justice and correctional system, which is really well documented and in all the reports that have come out recently.
In August, the Yukon Department of Justice issued a request for expressions of interest for supervised community housing for justice-involved women transitioning back into the community. However, they declined to be interviewed for this story. At this time, there's still no word if and when a women's facility will be built in the territory. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Great work as always there from our Sarah Connors in the Yukon. It's time for a short break, but still to come. A professor who believes indigenizing education is too accommodating to First Nations.
So there's shame as an alumni that they're not doing what they can to understand what's happened and the impacts of colonialism in Nova Scotia.
An 11th hour attempt to save declining caribou numbers in Alberta.
Instead of fixing it, what they went and did was that they gave it back to Alberta, who was the cause of the problem.
Welcome back to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. A university professor recently wrote an article criticizing diversity and accommodations given to Indigenous students, specifically using one Mi'kmaq student as an example. Now, the family of the Mi'kmaq student is asking for restorative justice from the university. Angel Moore reports.
Paula Marshall, an alumni of St. Mary's University, was appalled when she read the article Indigenize This, written by a philosophy professor, John McKinnon.
His opinion of Indigenous people in Nova Scotia is a cause for concern because he is out there teaching and promoting his beliefs to other students that are attending his classes. Whether it is a form of blatant or subtle racism.
The article criticizes diversity hiring, raising the Mi'kmaq flag, acknowledging Mi'kmaq unceded territory, as well as accommodating Indigenous students with in-class tutors whose first language is Mi'kmaq. The article refers to a student McKinnon refers to as Q, who Marshall says is her granddaughter, Kendra Gould. Gould did not want to come forward while in school.
I waited until I graduated because I didn't want other professors to label me, but I also didn't want them to think of me as a dumb student.
McKinnon did not want to appear on camera and said in an email to APTN that he was mortified when he found out the student knew about the article, but he still opposes universities indigenizing and accommodations given to Indigenous students if they cannot function in written English. Marshall, who works in reformative justice, says the university has not responded effectively.
This university, though they promote diversity and talk about indigenizing, did not have actions to follow that up.
So there's shame as an alumni that they're not doing what they can to understand what's happened and the impacts of colonialism in Nova Scotia.
In an email statement to APTN, St. Mary's University said the matter is under investigation and they cannot comment. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabukduk, Halifax.
In Saskatoon, a small publishing company has been putting out coloring books to help the dialogue with kids about some pretty tough topics. And this year they are tackling one of the most sensitive issues that kids really need to talk about. Priscilla Wolf has the story.
Rick Langley is the founder and executive director for the Hands-On Outreach and Development Center in Saskatoon. He's been traveling to the Northern First Nation schools for years, giving motivational speeches to youth, and he found a disturbing trend.
We also found that they were really struggling in the communities with some other aspects as well. It wasn't just bullying. It was suicide was paramount. It was just horrific how our communities were being devastated by suicide. And along with that, racism was part of the issues. A lot of them it was just sort of a thing they grew up with and understood from day one, that they took it on the chin like it was just expected instead of what a tragedy. And so we thought, well, is there some way we could introduce topics on a lighter basis?
That's when Langley decided to develop coloring books for Indigenous youth in grades 1 to 3 to tackle these difficult subjects: bullying, racism, and now suicide. Langley, who raises donations to put out the books, consulted with elders and his illustrator, Glenn Strong, who's Métis.
It was an easy decision, but a hard topic to come up with. And it was the one book we struggled with the longest. We probably spent 3 months just discussing the different ways we can do it gently enough for a grade 1, 2, 3 to understand, but still have enough meat and potatoes to the subject that it was warranted as a conversation piece, or at least a conversation starter.
In early October, Langley and Strong donated and delivered 1,250 coloring books about suicide to the Prince Albert Grand Council to use in their schools. And the council says that elders will work with the kids to discuss this difficult subject.
It's a culturally appropriate tool, and by bringing together like the elder and the youth, and it's going to be in that space that will stimulate discussions on this serious topic.
The coloring books will be used in 27 of the Prince Albert Grand Council schools under the guidance of elders and teachers. Priscilla Wolf, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
The federal and Alberta governments have been under pressure to protect declining caribou herds in that province. Late last month, both governments signed an agreement to help the herds, but now several groups are saying the new deal won't act quickly enough to help. Chris Stewart has the story.
Alberta's caribou populations are threatened. There are only 15 herds left in the province, with an estimated total population of about 2,000. Last year, the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, the Mikisew Cree First Nation, and environmental groups said the animals were at risk from clear-cutting and resource extraction. And they filed an application with the federal government to protect the caribou under the Species at Risk Act. Under that act, the feds would have to work with Alberta to protect critical habitat for endangered species. Rather than forcing the feds and Alberta to follow the Species at Risk Act, the federal and provincial governments decided to work together. In October, they signed an agreement to help the populations improve, and the legal action was dropped. The federal government is not using the Species at Risk Act and will not act themselves. Instead, they will help fund Alberta's caribou plan. The Alberta government says they will have a plan in place within 5 to 10 years for all caribou populations, but it could take 50 to 100 years to get the herds stable. Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation Chief Alan Adams says he is disappointed the federal government is counting on Alberta to solve the problem.
Instead of fixing it, what they went and did was that they gave it back to Alberta, who was the cause of the problem, and it's going nowhere. It's just like, how would you say, when the fox comes to the hen house, it creates a lot of problems. But this time now, it's just like us, we're putting the hen house right where the fox is living. So I don't think it's going to get any better.
Adams says that he does not expect any real action will be done. He says the herds do not have 5 years before action is taken.
In 5 years, nobody's going to do nothing about it. It's going to be forgotten in their system, and then we're going to be right back at it again, arguing about the same scenario.
Carolyn Campbell, a conservation specialist with the Alberta Wildlife Association, a nonprofit, says that the new agreement has no teeth. She thinks it might be business as usual, with oil and gas extraction and clear-cutting continuing to threaten the caribou herds.
At least the agreement gives a timeline, but there's no consequences if they miss it. That's the problem. And meanwhile, there's ongoing forestry. We don't believe it's sustainable and supporting caribou and caribou's declining populations.
Chief Adams says he wants the federal government to sit down with Indigenous groups in the province.
If the government is serious about working on this issue, then they have to come and sit down with the First Nation in order to move this thing forward, because giving it back to the province is just giving back trouble to them.
Alberta Environment and Parks Minister Jason Nixon and Federal Minister for the Environment and Climate Change Jonathan Wilkinson were not available to comment before airtime. Eco-justice lawyer Barry Robinson, working with the coalition, says they are not ruling out future litigation. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Well, hopefully the caribou numbers in Alberta come back one way or another very soon. We have to take one more break. But coming up, we'll hear from some newlyweds following changes to Ontario's Marriage Act.
The changes in the Marriage Act will allow a person to solemnize a marriage in Ontario if they belong to the band, a First Nations Métis settlement, or Inuit.
Welcome back to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. This next story is about one of Canada's most recognized and celebrated actors. With numerous awards and accolades under his belt, his star is about to get even brighter. Here's APTN's Tina House.
All right, self-serve. I'll do that. And it's less. Well, it is, but then you don't get to hang out with me and get all the benefits.
Lauren Cardinal from the Sucker Creek First Nation in Alberta is best known for his recurring role in Corner Gas, the TV series, and also Corner Gas, the animation, which just aired its third season just recently.
You forgot today is my birthday, didn't you?
Forgot? I forgot Karen's birthday.
He has 2 Gemini nominations for his portrayal of Sergeant Davis Quinton, and he won a Gemini Award for Best Ensemble Performance in the Corner Gas franchise.
Swinging handcuffs is my thing. It's what I'm known for.
And when asked what it was like seeing himself as an animated character,
I said, whatever you do, just give me a waist. Because the first drawings I saw, it was like this, and I was going, no, just kind of like that, kind of like.
It's like I have to give you guys a ticket for loitering. $500? Or come to Karen's party tonight. Teenagers drinking in the park. You know where there's more booze?
I never thought, it's just things, I'll be thin and pretty forever. So it's quite awesome.
Before finding stardom, he played rugby and worked as a tree planter and photographer in Alberta before moving to Kamloops, BC in the late 1980s. And it was there that by chance he stumbled upon an acting class at the local college.
I asked my teacher, I said, Dr. David Edwards, I said, how do I make a living at this? How do I become a professional actor and do this all the time? And his best advice he gave to me was get training. Find the place to get the best training you can get. So I did. I ended up at the University of Alberta and dedicated 3 years of my life to learn the technique and craft of acting, classical theater training, classical Shakespeare training. And it was the best investment I made in myself ever, and it's paid itself off numerous times.
And in honor of his work on TV and on stage, the Roxy Theatre in Edmonton, Alberta, is also going to be renaming the Black Box Theatre after him. With such a storied career, Lawrence says it got even better when he got cast last year on FBI Most Wanted on CBS.
Not every day you get Dick Wolf coming to call on you. It's one of these, I never auditioned for it. They just got a hold of my agent.
More recently, he won the Best Actor award at the prestigious American Indian Film Festival for the film Kayak to Clem 2. and he's also the recipient of the August Schellenberg Award from the Imaginative Film Festival. He's also received an honorary PhD from Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops, BC. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
You must be loving this.
The province of Ontario recently made changes to their Marriage Act. It now recognizes traditional Indigenous weddings and allows members of Indigenous communities to perform the ceremonies. Jamie Pashagumskum spoke to an Indigenous wedding officiant on the changes to the Act and to some newlyweds on their big day.
Despite COVID-19, it was everything they planned. An outside venue in a traditional palisade on Anne-Marie's home community of Niashingnaming, Cape Croker. Sanford White says he and his wife come from traditional backgrounds.
The way we were raised, we felt that it would be important way for us to do the ceremony, and then we wanted to mix it with a little bit of modern style wedding.
Anne-Marie Prue White said they consulted elders on traditional Ojibwe weddings.
We did seek out two of our elders that are our traditional mentors, and we did speak about what those teachings look like through that old traditional protocols. We wanted to respect those Anishinaabe protocols.
Elaine Kiknosaway is a First Nation wedding officiant and says people still need to get a marriage license, but now community members can conduct weddings.
The changes in the Marriage Act will allow a person to solemnize a marriage in Ontario if they belong to the band, a First Nations Métis settlement, or Inuit community, but they've taken a little further and said organization. So organizations within communities can say, we identify this person.
Kignosaway says she likes to see ceremonies reflecting the couple's personalities and not just the same old, same old. Anne-Marie says they incorporated as much of the Anishinaabe language as they could, including the word gazagin for love.
In the English language, we say I love you or I love you, but in the Anishinaabe language, it means more than just I love you. It means like I share him with the world, or I'm sharing my love with him with the world. It like means so much more than just I love you.
COVID protocols meant less people attending the wedding, but Anne-Marie says it all fell into place in the end.
The people from my community just pulled together, and my cousins, and I couldn't have done it without them. But we actually saved money instead of having the huge gathering, so that was the bonus.
The couple say if COVID restrictions permit, they will renew their vows next year with a larger gathering. Jamie Pashagumskum, APTN National News, London, Ontario.
Congratulations to the happy couple, and it's nice to see them not letting the pandemic stand in the way of their wedding. Well, that does it for us here at APTN National News, but stick around. An encore showing of Face to Face with Jeremy Dutcher starts right now. I'm Daryl Stranger. Have a great night.